Dr. Robert Brooks, I'm delighted to be speaking to you on behalf of the National Youth Council of Ireland and to have you input into our annual conference, which this year is on the theme of youth development through the arts. And you are a psychologist on the faculty of Harvard Medical School, and you have lectured nationally and internationally and written extensively about factors that help children and adolescents to deal with stress and become more hopeful, responsible, caring and resilient. And I suppose I first became aware of your work when I was reading something about Islands of Competence. And I just thought that was such a meaningful and poetic phrase. And it really spoke to the truth of my experience of working with young people through the arts, and where they have this area where they can be successful and they can be good at something, and how meaningful that can be in their lives. So that piece of research really resonated for me, and I began to read more about your work. So maybe as our first question, could I ask you about your areas of practice and research and how these came to be your special areas of research?
Yes, over the years, I've seen children, adolescents, and adults. And as a psychologist, I was originally trained to look at what's wrong with people and what we call almost a deficit model, to fix things. And I will tell you how even that metaphor, Islands of Competence, came about, because it was during a very dark moment, it seemed like to me, and out of some dark moments can come from some really positive moments. What happened was, one day I had one of these days, I'm sure other people have had it, where I just felt every one of my patients was not doing very well. And I was sitting down after a long day, and I had this image almost that all of my patients seemed to be drowning in this ocean of inadequacy. And I said, if there's an ocean of inadequacy, there must be islands of competence. And I'll tell you, and at that moment, the shift that took place in me was profound, because I said, you know, as a psychologist, and this was 30-something years ago, you spent most of your time looking at what's wrong with people and how to fix it. I think what you really have to start looking at really are the strengths of people, and what can people build upon to feel better about themselves, to feel more competent. So I said, I got to start searching for islands of competence. And little did I know, a lot of it, given my other work, was going to lead to the notion of arts, the importance of arts for children, because one of my toughest positions, I actually ran a locked door unit in a psychiatric hospital for children and adolescents. These were very challenging youth. It was a locked door unit of a psychiatric hospital. And interestingly enough, what I saw is that the kids often seemed to do best, their behavior was better when they were involved in the arts. We had what was called a rehab program, but it was really an arts program. And they would proudly show me their artwork. They would proudly show me different things they had made. There was a couple of kids who were very musically oriented, and they would put on a show. And I started saying to myself, we really have to look at the whole child, all aspects of their growth and development. While they did not feel very competent at that moment, maybe in academic work, what I found was by having them feel competent in the arts, it was like, if you find your island of competence, you feel good about yourself, you are then willing to take risks and move towards those areas that you might not feel as competent about, such as academic work. And it just fascinated me. And so every child I met, I asked what he or she thought was their strengths or islands of competence. I started asking parents what they saw as the children's islands of competence. I started asking teachers what they saw as kids' islands of competence. And it became really this metaphor that took hold of me. And it really led me then to look much more at what helps kids to bounce back and be resilient.
Okay, so can I ask you about that? When you talk about young people and children being resilient, what do you mean? What does how do you describe resilience?
Yeah, it can be a very complex concept, but the way I'm using it is that resilience really is the capacity to bounce back from challenges and adversity, which all children have, some much more than others. It's the ability, and what I'm going to say now is very important, the ability to find ways of coping effectively. Resilience doesn't mean you're not going to face problems. Resilience means that when problems arise, you have the capacity to really cope effectively. It also means that you to start developing certain skills that help you, one, to minimize the challenges, and when they arise, to handle them effectively. So the whole term, almost stems from physical properties to be able to bounce back. And that ties to really having a much more positive outlook on life, to really be much more optimistic, to really feel that you really can control much more what is going on. And I've often said a resilient person is a person who starts to realize they are the authors of their own lives. That while negative and bad things may happen, they have more control over their reaction to things than they may realize.
I think that's really interesting because young people in Ireland who are 17, they were 12 when the financial crash happened. So their entire adolescence has taken place in a very difficult financial environment. And that has impacted the youth work that they're a part of, the education system that they're a part of, and often, their family life and their personal lives as well. So this idea of that it's not that you expect your life to be free from challenges, but that you have developed ways of kind of overcoming those challenges. I think that is really resonant in Irish young people and Irish teenagers. Right.
Yeah, you bring up a very interesting point. See, you can have some teenagers who are growing up under a financial crisis, and they may feel this is how it's always going to be, so they're not going to be very resilient. There's a concept called learned helplessness in psychology, where you almost feel whatever I do, nothing good will come of it. Then there are those adolescents who really feel, you know what? These last 4 or 5 years have been extremely difficult, very stressful, but they start to believe, what is it that I may be able to do for my future? What is it that others can help me to do so that I can go down a more positive path? It's an outlook. That's why I in my books I talk about a resilient mindset, a way that we look at ourselves in the world, and some people, their mindset is very resilient, and they're able to see hope there. They're able to think about how I'm going to solve some of these problems, while others, unfortunately, develop what they call learned helplessness. They just start feeling very defeated. There are no areas of strength in their life. This is their belief. And then, of course, it gets worse, because if you feel learned helplessness, then you give up on things, you don't see opportunities, and you really get more and more depressed.
And having an island of competence, this is a way of building your resiliency.
Yes. Just to give you in anticipation, I know of this interview, I was thinking of several of my patients where the Islands of Competence especially related to the arts. So years ago, I saw a 12-year-old girl in therapy. She had really very low self-esteem. She didn't feel very competent. But what I discovered when I interviewed her is she told me one thing. One island of competence she had was she had a lovely singing voice. And yet she really wasn't using it. And I encouraged her to. And this was such a lovely moment when she went out and joined. Actually, I thought she was going to try out for a school play. No, she went straight to a semi-professional group. And she got a singing role. And I still remember the day she came in and said, Dr. Brooks, are you going to be able to come to my play? And so I came, and I saw her, and of course her family was there, and I saw a part of her, Anne, that I had not seen before. She seemed so self-assured. She seemed so happy up there. And that was a turning point. Similarly, I saw a 16-year-old boy, the same thing. He always was interested in the arts, especially theater. He went out for his high school play, the same kind of thing. He invited me to attend, and he actually also, he just thought he'd be he said in the background, he actually had some lines to say, and it was wonderful. And it was, what it is an island of competence, especially in the arts, why it's so important, it's very concrete. People can see it. You know, whether you're building something, you're drawing something, you're painting something. With this boy being up in front of the stage with 300 people in the audience, it said to him, I can do well. I can really succeed at different things. And the last example I have was also a teenage boy I saw who was very artistic. And we really talked about that, and he took more art lessons, he cultivated that, and it ended up that he entered a contest here in Massachusetts, won an award for an abstract painting that was hanging by the Boston Harbor side, and then he entered in a national contest and was hanging in a New York City art gallery. Well, that was like worth 10 years of therapy, I think. So any island of competence certainly is important. But I always also look for those, I often say, those that can be displayed, where others can see it and admire it. And that's what I love about the arts, whether it's dancing, music, visual arts, very, very powerful.
We have been talking about how the arts offers young people a kind of a unique opportunity in terms of islands of competence, because they can display those competences and they can have them admired and other people can see. And in my own work, I think what I would add to that is the opportunity to be seen yourself. If you're on stage, people really see you. If you are singing, people can really hear you. And I think that moment of really being seen and heard is so important in the life of a young person.
I definitely agree. That's why I added in my workshops, we have to identify, reinforce, and that's why I added, Anne, the word, and display, if possible, islands of competence. Whether it's in schools, having kids' artwork up, or whatever, wherever it is. Because it's one thing to have an island of competence and you're engaged in it. That's helpful in its own right. But really to have others to see it and to be able to give you this feedback, it's just wonderful.
Okay. Can I ask you as well, you have talked, and again, I just find the phrase so poetic about islands of competence, and my understanding is you were building on the work of another psychologist who had a wonderful term, the charismatic adult. Is that true?
Yeah, actually, his term I heard after Islands of Competence, but let me tell you how they tie together. In all the research that was done, and this is very important for all of the mentors, all of the teachers, whomever, who are doing work, say in your program or working with any youth in Ireland or anywhere, is this. In all of the research that was done about resilience, when they asked adults who had really overcome great adversity from their childhood, and they said to them, we could have never predicted, based on how things were when you were growing up. Some came from abusive homes. Some, were very at risk because of poverty. When they asked, why do you think today you're as hopeful and as optimistic as you are now as an adult, that you have a decent job, good relations? The number one answer was always the same. And it's a very important answer. It sounds so simple, but it's why maybe in a very spiritual way we're all here. The number one answer was, there was at least one person along the way who truly believed in me and stood by me. And in 1988, a psychologist who died a few years ago, he was one of my heroes. His name was Dr. Julius Siegel from Washington, D.C. He used a term in an article. He called that person a charismatic adult in a child's life. And whether one likes the term or not, everyone loves his definition. It's poetic. He says a charismatic adult is an adult from whom a child or adolescent gathers strength. And I love that image of gather strength. So whether you're working with a child in an art project or teaching them a dance, whatever it is, that child or adolescent gathers strength from you. They're learning from you. And I love the term so much, and why it ties to resilience is that every child needs, I hope they have a lot of charismatic adults from whom they gather strength. And that's why I started to say, to parents, when you put your children to bed at night, do you ask this question: is my son or daughter stronger because of things I've said or done, or less strong today? I ask every teacher, to think about, is my student stronger because of things I've said or done today, or less strong? If you're teaching working with a child around an art project or a play or music, do they gather strength from you? And I must tell you, it was so interesting because so many people loved the term. I gave Dr. Siegel full credit, of course, and I would hear this: okay, I want to be a charismatic adult. What do I actually say and do? Sometimes I kid. I said, maybe we should all get T-shirts. I am a charismatic adult. But there are very important things. And the people, with your youth council who are working with youth, they are doing things that will last a lifetime. That's what I always say. When I've interviewed adults, they will tell me about a play they were in 30 years ago that made a difference in their life. They'll tell me about artwork that was displayed. They won't tell me when they learned 2 + 2 is 4, but they'll tell me, other things there. And I could still think of one of my favorite teachers myself in the 6th grade, when I loved to draw cartoons and whatever, and he loved art. And I could still remember him putting up some of my posters. I remember in 9th grade, there was an art contest, an anti-litter campaign. I don't remember much about the 9th grade, but I remember I won 2nd prize in this contest, and my artwork was displayed in the junior high school, where I grew up in New York. So those teachers were charismatic adults in my life.
Well, I think that term is so important because and I know you and I have kind of talked over email and on the phone, and I had described kind of principle of youth work to you in Ireland, and I'm just really interested that there's an evidence base to support the importance of the relationship between the youth worker and the young person.
Yes, well, a couple of things you just said are very important. One is, I think the relationship is everything. I recently spoke at a conference, and like always happens, people say, just give me strategies. Just give me strategies to use. And I say the first strategy is to develop the relationship with the child. There's an old saying that kids don't care what you know till they first know you care. So they really have to feel that connection with you. And then they will go to the ends of the earth for you. So that certainly, is a very important thing. And then, of course, there are things that charismatic adults say and do that really help them to be charismatic adults. Once the relationship is there, then there are so many different things that, in ways one could help a child or adolescent to feel much more comfortable. So certainly there is research out there that shows that when an adolescent is involved in the arts with a very caring adult, it's more than just they're doing, a musical or they're painting something or they're learning a dance. They're learning, basically, I'll say this, they're learning much more a resilient mindset. They're nurturing a resilient mindset that will help them in their interpersonal skills, that will help them really be more hopeful and optimistic. And it's like all of their goals become much more hopeful, and their actual work in school improves. So to me, there's no doubt about that. And as a therapist, I've seen that working with some very at-risk kids. And I've always loved doing, work in the arts in my office, but certainly like the examples I gave, encouraging kids to be in a class play or do artwork, I've seen firsthand the overall impact, and I'll say the lifelong impact that this can have on an adolescent.
I think there's 2 things, before I go on to my next question, 2 things that you've said there that I think are really worth repeating. The first one is kids don't care what you know till they know that you care. I think that's a really lovely phrase that's kind of key in the way that youth work is planned. The other thing, I've remembered it now, it was you had said for us to ask at the end of the day, I'm thinking of all the youth workers who will be at our conference, who work with huge numbers of children and young people in a week. And I'm thinking for all of us to say to ourselves at the end of the day, did what I did today make a young person stronger? I think that is a really lovely strategy to remind yourself after a day's work, because sometimes it can be hard when you're in the eye of the storm. It can be hard to see the impact you're having. So I think that's a lovely thing for us to say at the end of the day.
And it's important. As I said, the very notion of Islands of Competence came after a tough day I had when no one seemed to be getting better. But it's important to ask that. It also helps us to remember that, and this part I really want to emphasize, it's something you said also, we may not see all of the results of our work right away. I mean, and what I mean by that is, we could question, did we have much of an impact? But what I've really loved is when I've interviewed for my research adults, and they'll tell me about an incident that happened 20 years ago in terms of a positive thing, and I'm sure the youth worker didn't even know it. And where I also see it is at some of my workshops for teachers, where a teacher will say, I bumped into someone who was in my class 20 years ago, and they said one of the most meaningful things, whatever the incident may have been, and the teacher will say, I don't even remember it. I don't remember it happening. And what that means is we may not even know we've had the impact, but on the child or adolescent, boy, it could be a lifelong kind of thing. So it's not like even if every kid we worked with knew the term charismatic adult, it's not like they're going to sit down 5 years from now and say, you are my charismatic adult, and, write us a note. I always say we just have to do the work we do, recognizing that everything we say and do may be helping that child to be much more resilient and hopeful for their entire lifetime.
And so much of that work, because as we've said, and we know that work is about the relationship, some of it will not be about the actual project or the curriculum or the activities that are planned. It'll be about the way that the quality of our interaction with that young person. Some of it is won't even be verbal. It'll be about what they instinctively feel, about how much we care about them. So I think that, having, I suppose, regard for the whole of our interaction and not just the activities we plan. That sounds to me, from what you're saying, like that's very important.
Oh, yes. Just to further that point, I became very interested when I read an article that said we should find ways to help children and adolescents feel welcome in our lives. And I love the word welcome. So I decided, as I visited different schools, to ask kids between the ages of 4.5 to 19, what can an adult do every day in the school to help you feel welcome? I got many answers, but it goes along with the point. The two most common ones were greet me by name, and I love the next one, smile. And a smile. And so sometimes we don't even think about it. And someone once said, is a smile that important? I said, look, there are some schools I have visited where I think it's against the law to smile, and I want to leave right away. And others, I don't care, it could be the toughest school, and people actually look welcoming and they're smiling. I want to stay there for the rest of my life. So it's the simple things. And it's for the kid to know you care about them. You know their name. You smile. You give them an encouraging word. It's nothing earth-shaking to us necessarily, but to that adolescent who's feeling vulnerable, it means so much. It's a connection to that adult.
I think I'm really interested in that because I think youth work has a kind of a particular contribution because it's complementary to formal education. I think youth work, I suppose, embraces those kind of principles inherently, and I think it will be really encouraging for youth workers to hear that that's borne out by the evidence, that the way in which they approach their work in a young person-centered way is borne out by evidence.
Yes, well, one of the exercises I do to make sure youth workers remember this is I ask in my workshops for youth workers, I ask for a few volunteers to come up and tell the group who was their charismatic adult when they were growing up, and to talk about what they said and did. because sometimes you don't even think about it. And I have had people come up who will tell me about a youth worker who, when they were kids 40 years ago, and they will smile, they'll tear up, they'll even cry in a very, lovely way. And they'll say, I never realized what impact that youth worker had.
In our work, I think all of us would feel under pressure to be showing the results with young people in a kind of even maybe in a medium-term way. And I think what you're saying reminds us to bear in mind that some of the outcomes are very, very long-term and that we can't always be in control of them. And just because we're not seeing them, not to believe that the groundwork is being laid for them.
Yes, even that young girl, 12-year-old who started this play, I knew it was helpful and whatever. And then I sort of lost touch with her. She had moved away, and then she moved back to Massachusetts. And she contacted me. Actually, the way she contacted me, she came to attend a talk I was giving in a local community. And she came up to me, and it was so interesting. She said, I don't know if you know the impact you had. And I thought I, had some impact. But you know what she really recalled right away? That I came to her play. This was like 25 years later, Anne. So, you realize, I thought it was important then, but for her 25 years later to say this was a very important moment in her life, I would have never known how important, but for her, it was like a turning point. And the fact her therapist came and saw her perform and display her Island of Competence meant so much to her.
Knowing what we know about Islands of Competence and charismatic adults and the relationship with the young person being central to our work, how can that inform how we plan youth arts for young people? How would that inform how we plan our work?
Well, there are a couple of several things. When people say, I want to be a charismatic adult, what do I say or do, which I get at all my workshops, there are certain things, and this gets to the notion, Anne, of a resilient mindset. And there are certain characteristics of kids who become or are resilient that we can really foster or nurture in doing arts with them. One main characteristic of a resilient mindset is the ability to solve problems and to think, about solutions. Because I often ask in my workshops, I say to the group, have you ever faced a problem that your first thought was, I don't even know where to begin? And everyone, I raise my hand, and I say, imagine if most of the problems you faced in life you felt that way, you would be overwhelmed. And so one of the things through the arts, what you have to do is you have to plan what you're going to do. You have to think ahead. You have to think about what are some of my goals here, especially if it's a little, longer term. So one of the things it promotes doing the artwork certainly is a certain problem-solving attitude. You learn to think before you act. Another very important thing is resilient people are people who know that at times there are going to be setbacks, they're going to make mistakes, but that they feel mistakes are accepted and expected. This is very important. Now, when you're doing artwork or you're learning a dance or you're singing, I don't think the first time anyone is this amazing, the talented person. So it's a very concrete way of learning. Some of my artwork's not going to look very good, or some of my songs are not going to be very good. So what we teach kids is that these things are going to happen, but then we learn from it. And what a great way to learn from it when you're doing something so concrete. And although at first people may say, but it's painful to make mistakes, what I say to youth workers is, but if that adolescent really knows you care about them, and you've also taken time to compliment them, then they learn something very important, that I can make mistakes, but there are these charismatic adults around me who will pick me up and really help me to learn from these mistakes. Another very important thing is this. When I was doing research years ago about school climate, I asked 1,500 adults to fill out an anonymous questionnaire and asked them this. One of the questions was, of all the memories you have of school, what is one of your favorite memories? Something an adult said or did that boosted your dignity and your motivation. The number one response I got was when the people recalled when they were asked to help out. I got responses like, I remember when a teacher asked me to pass out the milk and straws. I remember when a teacher asked me to tutor a younger child. Now, what I love about the arts work is when you're up on stage, you're really contributing to the well-being of others. It is just so powerful. There's research to show, not just in kids, but even into our elderly years, elderly people who are actively involved in helping others, even if their other habits may not be great, they're smoking too much, whatever, lead longer lives. So one of the things I love youth to do is, one, they are contributing to the well-being of others by displaying their artwork or whatever. But one of the goals would be for youth workers to maybe help these youth they are now assisting to someday contribute to other youth. So we serve as models, and it's very important. More and more, I've been talking a lot about the ways you teach kids to be more compassionate and caring is not to lecture to them, but by giving opportunities to help others.
That's really interesting. So there's there's a list almost of things. So the opportunity, when we're planning our work, if we build in the opportunity for young people to solve problems, the opportunity to embrace mistakes, but to have those mistakes, to make those mistakes in a supportive environment, the opportunity to have the outcomes displayed, so you're on stage or you get to share your work, opportunities to use the lovely phrase to boost their dignity or motivation, opportunities for them to help and contribute, to see themselves contributing to the well-being of others, and I suppose in the life cycle of a youth project where young people come through it and then become youth leaders, the opportunity to work with other young people.
Exactly. That last point I really like to emphasize, because you see, if you have benefited from the input of a youth worker, it is amazing how many of these kids will want to do the same someday. You're really teaching. In my books, I call it these charitable activities. They could be under volunteer activities or whatever, and they add so much meaning to our lives then.
Can I ask you as well, how important is play in the life of an adolescent or a young person? I'm asking that because I think we're very kind of clear about how play is so important to younger children. And the arts offers unique kind of opportunities for adolescents to play. So I'm wondering if, in your experience, how important is the opportunity to play?
I think it is critical. It's sad that too often we think of play just with children. I mean, it was great when I had children of my own, now grandchildren. You know, now I could play even more easily with them. But play is critical. I even with young children get upset when some preschools, all they want to focus on is academic skills, and the kid's 4 or 5 years old. Through play, not just with kids, but even with adolescents and even adults, I'll say, through play, I think we learn so much. One, it frees up our imagination. I think it's great way of problem solving. Is certainly one thing. I think also by play, and I'll also say playfulness, to me it could be a real stress reducer. We're all so stressed. To be able to play, I see it with my grandkids. If I am involved in playing with them, if you will, a lot of the other worries go away. Play also with adolescents, and I'll add adults again, to sit down and paint, to do cartoons. I mean, one of the reasons I love seeing all ages in my clinical practice is it's great when I'm, with a child to be able to sit on the floor. How many people work allows them to sit on the floor without them looking a little crazy? Me, it's part of my job. It teaches cognitive skills. So through play, it helps, and I'll also say playfulness. I think it helps us deal with stress more effectively. I think it helps us to be more creative. I think it's very refreshing. So when we go back to what we'll call work, we are better able to deal with work. And I think it's unfortunate to play a scene just as in the domain of young children. It is throughout our lives, and it could take different forms. And I've known some executives who work very hard but find time to be in an actual play or a musical or to paint, and it's very relaxing. Some of the adult patients I see do not play, and I'll try to find their island of competence and have them play more and have them think about activities that will bring them some sense of joy.
So you have been making these really nice points about young people being involved in the arts, providing the opportunity to play, and play providing them with opportunities to become refreshed, to relieve stress, to build their creativity, to build their imagination. And I thought that point was really nicely made, and that all of us, even as adults, should have those kind of opportunities, I suppose, as a kind of a counterpoint to the very kind of serious aspects of your life.
Definitely. I was going to even add that one of the benefits of being a youth worker is when you're helping the kids with the arts, you're really involved yourself. I think it is great. I've seen that as a therapist, and that I get a great deal of enjoyment out of it. So there's also the benefit for us, in addition to knowing we're having such an impact on the life of an adolescent. I just wish more people realize the power and importance of play and the arts. It's in terms of developing so many of life skills, as I talked about, but also a much more positive attitude towards life, especially during stressful times. It's so important.
I think that's it, and that kind of leads me to my final point. And I suppose we are very concerned, rightly so, I suppose, in the line of work that we do, about young people's resilience and how very, very difficult kind of economic and kind of social circumstances, kind of require us to build their resiliency. But I'm thinking about all of the youth workers that we work with, and the last couple of years have been very difficult for them too. They carry out their work in very difficult circumstances. And I'm wondering about advice or strategies you might have for them to build their resilience so that they can continue to work with young people and not, I suppose, become burnt out.
Right. I've become very interested in a concept called stress hardiness. Research looking at, say, when we work in certain positions that are stressful, what kind of attitude do we have to have? And in part, one of the things is they found that we should never forget that if the work we're doing is really helping others, that there's a purpose or passion for why we do what we do. That in itself does not add more pressure. It gives meaning to our work, and it helps us to be less stressed. And also, they found that an attitude is this: there will always be challenges, and they found that people are less stressed if they just almost say, I know there are going to be challenges. And some people then could say, I know there are going to be challenges. What can I learn from this? What can I do from it? Rather than feeling, oh my heavens, here's another challenge. I'm going to be very burdened by it. So the passion you feel, what they call commitment, the challenge, and then there's one other very important thing, which is a basic foundation of resilience throughout the lifespan, is that resilient people know that there are some things they have no control over, like the economic situation. What they do is they focus on what they have control over. So while you may have no control over the economic situation, what you have control over is your attitude and being able to help a child or adolescent even during difficult times. And finally, what I always tell people is we have to try to find balance in our life. I mean, my book about resilience in adults, the subtitle has the word balance in it. And by that, what I mean is, and I don't want to sound overly simplistic, but do we find time for some exercise in our life? Do we find time to pursue our island of competence? do we find time to be playful? So if we're spending all of our time just at our work, of course we're going to be feeling at times, as meaningful as the work is, we're going to feel pressure. And that's why a lot of my work with adults, Anne, really has them look at your overall day or week. Have you built in time for exercise? Have you built in a little time to meditate? Have you built in time for a few fun activities? Have you built in time for your family or friends? And some people have said to me, oh, that's not easy to do. And what I say, the alternative is worse. If you don't build in, then you're going to burn out. You won't be helpful to yourself or to others. So actually on my website, there are several articles called Stressed Out or Stress Hardy, which directly relate to the theme you brought up, because it's a very important theme.
Okay. I think that's a lovely, hopeful note for those of us working in this sector to kind of end on. I just want to say personally, from my point of view and the point of view of NYCI, I just want to thank you most sincerely for accepting our offer to speak at the conference and for bearing with us during technical difficulties. And by the time we're watching this in the National Museum on the 29th of November, I hope that from the National Youth Council of Ireland, we want to wish you and your family a happy and a peaceful Thanksgiving, and I hope that you will come and see us in person sometime soon.
I would love to.